Welcome back to 10 Times Better. In our third session, online pastor Rocky Hernandez will be hosting an in-depth discussion with pastors David Griffin and Chad Robinson as they talk about culture, sin, and what it looks like to love others like Jesus. Then we'll hear from Krista as she shares her story about learning to love others in spite of their struggles. The way we view others says everything about how we view God's love for us. Let's join in today's discussion as we walk through what it looks like to navigate a world of people with different views, opinions, and beliefs.
Welcome to session 3 of 10 Times Better. We're so glad that you are here again with your community groups. We hope that you are thriving and finding these times to be incredible. Speaking of incredible times, today I am with Pastor David and Pastor Chad. Gentlemen, welcome to our discussion today. I'm looking forward to hear what you have to teach. Now, the other sessions, I just was like, oh, you're the lead. David, you're the lead. But before we start, I actually want to just kind of throw you a question right off the bat. And I just want to know, do you ever think that there is something bigger that is happening in our political world? Have you noticed that it feels like you can just call somebody, say they're different than me, and then you can just use that as a justification to basically treat them any way you want?
Yeah, I think the thing we talk about is othering people, whether it be because of their political background, because of their, culture, their race, their ethnicity, what they do for a living, where they live. I mean, we find all of these reasons to kind of other people. And so I think that's really common. And that's certainly what could happen in any situation. Certainly, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have seen themselves as others, if you will, and kind of saw themselves even as better than the people in Babylon.
Yeah, so when we think about the way that plays out in our churches today and all of that other stuff, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are responding to the Babylonians, but they're not necessarily just treating them as others, are they?
No, it's interesting because it's real easy when you don't think you have a common enemy. Or what happens is people are looking for a common enemy. That happens, quite regularly. People are looking for someone to kind of be against. Right. And there, there's a thing in psychology called the looking glass self, which means you determine who you are by how you think other people see you. And one of the things that's happened in our world is because of social media and all those things, is that it becomes easy to put people in that category and then to hate them. Yeah. And to dislike them, to work against them because they are different than we are. And I think that we have to be careful in the church to make sure we don't misunderstand who our actual enemy is. Right. It's not another person. Because we're people of faith, we're not looking out there at some enemy. We actually are experiencing an enemy that's true for all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Both insiders and outsiders have the same enemy. Sure.
Knowing who your enemy is, or what it is that we're fighting against is actually really important. Chad, when you work at our 40 campus, you are the connections pastor there, you do a bang up job, and your job is relationships. At the end of the day, you are connecting people with each other. You're living out our mission, connecting people with God, connecting people with each other. Do you encounter this other attitude a lot in your area? How do you see it playing out?
It's weird for me in a lot of different ways because I kind of seek people that may look like others. I kind of seek people that may I'm wired to look for people that may just kind of be floating and drifting and trying to find a place and trying to find a spot. And those that just come across as different, but they're there. They're there on the campus, and they're obviously looking. And so I'm purposely going after those people to try to connect and to build those relationships with them.
And this is why, when we talk about connecting people to God, you mentioned that word, connecting people to God and one another, or even, the idea of changing the world. If we can get that common vision and focus on what's positive, and then recognize that we have that common enemy, right? That there is an enemy out there. There is sin, there is darkness. The passage of scripture that I was looking at this past week was 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5 says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. Amen. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ." Yeah. So you notice there's a battle that's waging, and that's really important, is there is a war It's just not a culture war.
That's right. That's right.
There is a battle. It's just not a political battle.
Okay.
Right.
And that therein is what happens for us as we begin to think that the culture is our enemy, and what we need to recognize is that no, our vision, our mission, our God needs to transform the culture.
Interesting. And I think that's, man, okay. So I'm sitting here and I'm listening to everything that you're saying, and I'm thinking about how my behavior in the church sometimes is. And I'm thinking about the fact that sometimes, especially as a pastor, I have a tendency to want to correct other people's behavior, to say, this then is how you should live your life, and these are the things that you're supposed to be doing. And essentially what it sounds like you're saying is like, the most important thing really is how am I living my life? And the thing that actually influences the most is living out my values in a culture that doesn't understand them. I don't have to explain those things to them, because the fact that they see them and they see what they produce is actually making the biggest impact.
Yeah. It's not unimportant that we say those words, but it's not the only thing. It's not like, well, we convince them somehow intellectually. And I think what can happen is we begin to believe that formulating public policy is the most important part of our faith.
Yeah.
And that's a real danger. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're on, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe the moral majority side versus the woke side. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If you believe that the primary objective is to set public policy, then you're not operating like, well, let's just say Jesus and Paul and, of course, Daniel in this particular story. Because Jesus and Paul were like, they're kind of painfully silent about public policy. There's a couple of times that Jesus speaks into public policy, one of which is when he asks for a coin. They're asking about taxes, and he throws it back and he says, well, whose picture's on it? And they're like, well, Caesar's. And he says, well, then pay taxes to Caesar. And they're like, whoa, that's crazy. Why wouldn't you speak against the Romans? And then there's another one that I think is really even more sinister. And that's when Jesus says, if a man asks you to walk 1 mile, then walk 2. That was a direct reference to the Romans that could say, you can walk a mile and you could carry their stuff for a mile, but they couldn't make you walk a second. And he says, listen, I want you to function in a way that will benefit the Roman Empire by paying taxes and carrying their stuff an extra mile.
Wow.
That was unbelievable. What a statement that is into that culture in that context. Amen. You talk about lifestyle, you talk about trusting your lifestyle evangelism and your character, there it is.
Because, and at the end of the day, it's all about, I guess, focus, right? Because our tendency is to say, no, we have to make a stand, and that's how we're going to impact. We have to fight to pass public policy, and if things don't go our way, then the world is falling down around us, and everybody hates us, and all this other stuff. But you're saying, actually, the battle is not there.
That's correct.
That this is a spiritual.
Yes, so we feel like, because we're in, kind of in the trenches, we feel like the battle is right here, but in reality, the battle is on a completely different level. Like Jesus tells the woman at the well, right? That it's not, it's not this mountain or that mountain. Everybody's arguing about a mountain. That's easy, that's physical, that's skin color, that's political party, that's geographical location. But there's a bigger battle that's raging, and I think that's important for all of us, to kind of buy into. And I think y'all probably know that, right? I don't know about your story, but was it more information that changed your life, or was it more relationship that changed your life?
Well, I was 10 years old when I was like, heard the gospel, or more importantly, I think I saw the gospel lived out. At 10 years old, I wasn't really worried about, the consequences of sin or eternal implications of my soul or anything like that. Honestly, if I'm being 100% completely honest, heaven and hell was a small part of the equation, something that I barely understood, really. I went to church, and I was impressed by the fact that there was this group of people, Piedmont Church of Christ, who loved me in a way that I had never experienced before. And then that was enough for me, man.
Yeah, and I know you well enough to know that even that church, some of the theology that they were embracing in that moment, you don't embrace today.
Yeah.
But you were loved by them.
Yeah.
Little Rocky was loved.
It changed my life.
Yeah.
And I would just jump in on that as well, because for me and my, understanding who God was and desiring him, it was more relational. It was just, as a child, just watching a gentleman that was in our church, and his wife had died from some complications, but I watched him come and serve and love me. And I watched him come and serve and love others. And when I got to that point in my life where I needed to make a decision, it was based a lot upon his lifestyle. And it was based upon a lot of what I seen him project that he taught just by how he existed and he loved other people.
Wow. Yeah. And that's some intensity, because do you think that we as Christians, do you think it's easier to look at the world and say, unless these things are happening in this exact way, that everything is failing? Is it easier to believe that than it is to believe that if I just love people, that somehow everything's going to work out?
Well, I think, first of all, there's probably a place where words are to come, but they should kind of follow a life of integrity and character. I mean, it's not like Daniel never mentioned what he was going to do,
right,
or even how it worked, but it wasn't where he began. He began with, you know what? I'm not fighting against Babylon. I'm fighting for character, integrity. It's a spiritual battle, and then I'm going to let the physical battle take care of itself.
Yeah. Is that the way that you want us as like the people in your church to kind of fashion our life, is to start with the integrity and then answer the questions?
Yeah, I think it's important. We sometimes speak of, lifestyle evangelism or relational evangelism, and I do realize that sometimes that means no evangelism. But it doesn't have to mean that. If you're praying for those people, if you're being intentional about the way that you're living, following your character, then God's going to open the door if you're looking for it, for a place for those words to actually follow. And how do you live out relational evangelism?
A lot of it is just through passionately just loving people. Being on the campus every week as an example, and as everybody comes through that door, you treat them like they're the most valuable, special person there.
Go ahead.
No, and that's what begins to lay the groundwork, is that they see the authenticity that I care about you.
Yeah, but Chad, where I saw for you, where this is even more clear, is not necessarily when people cross through the door. It's even out in the community. I've seen you do several community events, and you just have a heart for this, and you're constantly reaching out to people, sharing with people, inviting people. I remember you and I with one couple. I said, hey Chad, this family wants to come on Easter. We got a spot for them, and you go, I will make a spot. Well, I remember you saying, you remember that?
That's right. That's right. Because what I've noticed in my short 40-some years of living is that people just want to be seen for the most part. Right. We can get to the behaviors. We can get to the teachings. We understand what the Word of God says. But if we can just connect through love and to let people know that they're seen and that they're valued, it lays the groundwork for so much ministry to be done.
Yeah, I don't want to get people to be moral or even vote for a particular candidate on their way to hell.
No.
I mean, that doesn't help us at all, right? I mean, the fact that we've just gotten people to change this behavior or that behavior, or change their association, or who they're othering, or how much or how patriotic they feel, is that really a success, or do we want something more for them?
There's a balance there, and I think that you've kind of talked about this too, because it's not either or, because you mentioned, or I've seen play out sometimes where people will take I'm just going to love them, and I'm never going to have that critical conversation with them. I'm never going to have that and if we fail to do that, do you think that people will never know that they are sinners who need a savior? And where's that balance? Like, how do we know if we're doing one over the other?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think that if you continue to make deposits into a relationship,
yes.
And then I want to make sure I get this and straight, and I think this is important for everyone that's listening and paying attention, and praying for them. I will tell you that if you will be intentional in your prayer closet, if you will, praying for an opportunity to speak those words of the gospel that would be consistent with the life of the gospel that you're living, I'm telling you, it's going to happen. It's not like you're going to have to be reminded, and someone's going to have to drop a 4 spiritual laws tract in front of you for you to be able to. It's going to happen if you will look for that opportunity. And if not you, God will send somebody else.
It is about balance, but I think being gracious up front. allows for the other part to come. And there was a verse, it's aloof for me right now, that talks about that, just being gracious and laying that foundation of that first. And then it just happens. It's almost every opportunity that I've ever had to just show evangelism and that style of life to people. It's because that the love and the grace was there first, and then came the opportunity because something inside them wants to know.
Yeah, so I think the verse you're referencing, I just looked it up here, is Colossians 4:5-6, which says, walk in wisdom towards outsiders,
Yes.
making the best use of the time. Right. How do you do that? Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt.
Yes.
So that you may know how you ought to answer each person. And our danger is that we let our speech be salty, seasoned with grace.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
He said we let our speech be salty,
Yes.
seasoned with grace.
And that's not what the text says.
No.
Wow.
No, not at all.
That's pretty good. Well, thank you, pastors. Thank you very much. And thank you, guys. We hope that you are encouraged to walk in wisdom, to remember who the enemy is, to remember that this is a spiritual battle, to walk with integrity and to love people as you learn to live 10 times better. God bless.
I grew up with a mom who was very legalistic, very ultra-conservative. She taught me that there were some sins that were worse than others in God's eyes. I learned to look down on those people who committed those sins, especially people who lived a life full of those sins. That was something that I struggled with for years as an adult, just really being judgmental and looking down at people. I finally got to a place where I didn't like the way that my heart felt when I was being this way, and I knew that this wasn't glorifying to God. So I really started this process of just asking God to just transform everything in my mind, everything that I had been taught. So one year, I was able to go to the Passion Conference in Atlanta, and I learned about sex trafficking there, and it was just something that God just didn't let me forget, and He just kept bringing it to mind. And I learned about safe houses and how you could volunteer there. I ended up getting a job at one of them. It was just really, really hard. But during that time, God just really showed me a new perspective on people. And before I went into the safe house, I remember thinking about prostitution as just this evil, awful, dirty thing, which it is, absolutely. But I labeled the prostitutes that as well. And through my training at the safe house, I learned we didn't even use the word prostitute at all, because none of these girls were that. Because labeling them as prostitutes makes them criminals, but really what they were victims. Something that really helped me as well is to separate a person from their sin, not define people by their sin, and that I would be no better were it not for the fact that I have Jesus. And so just realizing that they are not my enemy, they have the same enemy as me. They're fighting this battle of sin and destruction in the world the same way that I would be without Christ. And how can I love that person beside me in a way that causes them to feel the love of Christ?
Krista demonstrated a beautiful truth that when we draw close to God, He helps us see others the way that He sees them. Our discussion was a wonderful reminder that those around us are not our enemies, and instead of othering people, we should love them like Christ loves us. Speak with your group about these truths, encourage and share with one another, and use the link in the description to access today's discussion guide. We love you, we're praying for you, and we'll see you next week.